Okay, let's move on and look at the next section, which is all about critical activities. So an activity is critical if there's no wiggle room at all in the time we have to complete it. If its duration increases overall, if we complete it in more time than we've said in the diagram, the overall project's duration will increase. Now, some of the activities we're going to have some wiggle room in there, so that if they took a bit longer than we planned, it won't increase the overall time, which is in the box in the sync at the end. But some are critical, and these critical ones, there's absolutely no room for movement. If we didn't complete it in the time stated, then the whole project would be delayed. Okay, so a critical path is one from source to sync following only critical activities. It's the longest path in the network. At each vertex on a critical path, the early time equals the late time. So you may have noticed when we drew some of these diagrams, we're going to use the same two that we've just drawn in the previous video. That there are some events where the early and late times are the same. So there's no difference between them. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick these ones and follow the path between them. And this is going to be the critical path. So identify any critical paths and critical activities in this activity network. So once we've identified the critical activities, so again, just to repeat that, the critical activities are ones that for any increase in its duration, it would increase the overall project's duration. So there's no time between early and late times. They'd have to start exactly then, and we'd have to move on to the next activity exactly as it ends. So if we kind of follow the flow of the diagram for these, if I follow activity C and D, and it looks like I'm going to go to G next, to I, and then to J, yeah, that joins them all up, doesn't it? So the critical activities are going to be C, D, G, and I, and J. And the critical path is going to be, you know, that path I've drawn on. Okay, I don't think there's anything else to say on that one. But on this diagram, it's going to become clearer why we're giving this warning in the red box. So be warned, not all activities connecting critical events are necessarily critical. So let's highlight the events where the early and late time are the same. And we're going to need to join these events with the critical activities to find out the critical path. Now, this is definitely going to be a critical activity, B. D is definitely going to be a critical activity. H is definitely going to be a critical activity. However, what we're looking for is that the time to complete the activity is exactly the difference between the times in both the events. So B is 7, the time to complete B is 7, so that's exactly the gap between 0 and 7. There's no wiggle room. Equally, the time taken to complete D is 5, so if we start at 7 and finish at 12, there's no gap in between. However, if you look at I, for example, the difference between 12 and 16 is actually 4. So because I takes a time of 3, there is a little bit of wiggle room in there. There's a space of, you know, a time of 1 that this activity could shift either way, because of it's not exactly the difference between the start and late finishes in each of the events. So I is actually not a critical activity. We'll draw the dummy in because we want to connect everything up. Equally, K has a time to complete of 5, but the difference between 16 and 22 is actually 6. So K is not going to be a critical activity. It's only a critical activity if the time taken to complete is exactly the difference between the early and late start times. So what do you think? Is J going to be a critical activity? Well, if I look at the difference between the start and end times here and here, it's 10. So that's exactly the time it takes to complete J. So J is definitely going to be critical. Equally for this dummy. Dummy has no weight, no time connected to it. And L, well, the difference between 16 and 22 is 6. L takes 6 to complete, so this is going to be critical. There's no room to shift that time anywhere in that diagram. Okay, so the critical activities are going to be B, D, just reading kind of the path from the diagram, H, J and L. Okay, and the critical paths are as drawn on the diagram. Okay, so that's about it for critical activities. Just to help get the hang of that, now let's look at exercise 8D.